Back tonight on In Focus, the NPA has referred Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Justice to an affidavit implicating Mbeki-era ANC officials in interference with the Truth and Reconciliation recommendations. An inquiry into what that involved against the prosecution of TRC cases is on the cards. Joining us for more on that story, Dr. Marjorie Jobson, National Director of the Khulumani Support Group, an organization looking after the interests of thousands of victims of apartheid. Dr. Jobson, good evening and thank you very much for your time. So an inquiry into what you've always been calling for to be looked at, that it's the interference of some political players into the implementation of the recommendations of the TRC. As a group of survivors of apartheid, of human rights violations, how do you find these news?
So Thabo, we have known about the political interference through affidavits that were placed in the court for the Nokuthula Simelane case, where Vusi Pikoli and other people made very clear that there was an agenda not to allow the prosecution to go forward. And then we discovered how long delayed the files were on the desks of certain investigators in the Hawks, as it is known now. So that we've known for a very long time. It's very, very sad, but what we understand is that there were some agreements that have never been made fully public, that apartheid perpetrators would not be prosecuted, and that if they were prosecuted, then there would be a whole lot of disclosure of things that it was felt that the political leaders, current political leaders, would not want to have emerge in the light of day. So that's been what the trade-off is, and that's been what's held things up for so long. So yes, it's not a surprise, and we're grateful for. There's quite a strong team now working on it. I've met some of the investigators. They were all vetted, so they are no longer infiltrated by ex-security cops, which is what happened previously. But, you know, this is really important in terms of a measure of justice for victims and survivors, and especially for those families. But the bigger picture is the really serious issue of there has not been an equal justice for all victims and survivors of apartheid atrocities. You know, we're busy preparing for the 30th commemoration of the Boipatong massacre on the 17th of June. And there's so much. People in Boipatong have never yet had the opportunity of counseling. So many people have died with basically what we call broken hearts, which is what happens, you know. So we have a real issue around what does justice look like for victims and survivors, as opposed to the kind of justice that court cases can give. But the court cases use up so many resources to get to any decision. So, I mean, for us, it's really important that we start to recognize. I mean, I was talking to people in preparation for tonight, and they said, but we are still alive and we are still suffering, and we want to talk for ourselves, and we don't want people to talk for us, and we are not happy, and we understand, but we have suffered so much and we are still here, and there is almost nothing being done for our well-being. Well, we try very hard to do that, but we're very, very worried about what we are aware of as threats on the remaining money in the President's Fund, which is that money secured for paying reparations and supporting reparative remedies for victims. And that there has never been a proper plan. We've been participating in focus groups with the United Nations on reparations, and the key principle is you don't do anything without the participation of the victims and survivors themselves. And that's been a huge problem. We don't know what the TRC unit is doing. We don't know that the money is safe in the President's Fund. That is the money that people have waited 25 years for now, to get some sense of a justice for the people who are living, who suffered immensely in the struggle. So yes, I mean, I appreciate what is involved in the technical work of bringing prosecution cases, but I'm very much more concerned about the well-being of the thousands of people who are still struggling immensely in their lives.
Yeah, and what recommendations then would you have that could assist the NPA move this forward much quicker? I see the NPA's head, Shamila Batoyi, was with the Justice Portfolio Committee as well. I mean, what would be your recommendations for all those players, including those 16 prosecutors who are working on these TRC cases, that could fast-track their work and getting to, I suppose, the prosecution, so that the people can get to speak for themselves, you know, before time passes?
Thabo, yes, what I was explaining, yes, I mean, and that is another thing that happens in these sort of judicial inquests that are opened. There are incredibly expensive processes, and we don't want to see the money that is left, 1.5 billion rand in the President's Fund, being diverted for anything other than for reparations for the victims who are still alive and struggling. So yes, these legal things are very technical. One of the big movements in transitional justice has been around how do you create situations where the victims and survivors speak for themselves, you know. That happens to a very limited extent. A lot of the field of transitional justice has become the domain of experts, and so we welcome that the NPA is taking forward prosecutions that will bring some truth, but there's an immense amount of truth that has still yet to be recovered, an immense amount of listening and respect for the victims who are still struggling, you know. So we're just aware of how much money it takes to do these kinds of prosecutions, and we were really worried about the burden of ill health and suffering that the living victims of those atrocities are still carrying. Can you hear? It's a different kind of justice. One is a very technical legal justice, and we want the justice of care for the well-being of the widows of all these people. It's a very different proposition for us as a victim and survivor movement.
Dr. Jobson, so I mean, I hear what you're saying. So you would rather that money be given to the victims and the process of reparation be concluded, at least be sped up at this particular point. Would you want that to be happening at tandem with these judicial inquiries?
What we want is, we don't want the money left in the President's Fund to be touched without the participation of victims. Now, at the moment, the TRC unit is visiting 6 communities. We have no idea which communities they are. They never sit and engage directly with the victims and survivors. That is a huge problem. It's the founding principle of reparations. You involve the people. So, you know, when you get into legal processes, that becomes the domain of lawyers. But reparations is the domain chiefly of victims and survivors who know best what they need. And so we've constructed many, many proposals for the Department of Justice around how that money could be invested to offer counseling programs, to offer contributions for enterprise activities. We've submitted an immense amount of work to the Department of Justice, and they hold the money, and we are very, very scared that that money is going to be diverted without the permission or the consent of victims by people who consider themselves expert about victims' lives. That can never work. That is no way to create a sense of justice for people.
I hear you indeed, Dr. Marjorie Jobson, National Director of Khulumani Support Group. I appreciate your time, and thank you very much for joining us tonight here on In Focus.